Comic book day number 1. So, Ethan, what was your first comic book?
My first comic book was Infinity Inc. with the New Heroes of Earth 2 back when I was like 4 or 5, I think.
So, were you reading those comic books yourself?
No, you were reading them to me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were read to me by Mr. Oddfellow. Why do you choose to read them to me?
Why did I choose to read those? Because they were younger heroes and they weren't so tied up in a lot of other DC mythos to have to explain a bunch of backstory on them.
That makes sense. I don't think it'd be fun to spend like an hour before reading each comic or stop and explain for an hour in the middle of each comic to tell everybody's backstory in the middle of it.
Yeah, because that was all new, because they were new characters. Except they weren't new when we read them to you, but they were new for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about it?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Okay, this is 30 Days of Comics, day number 1. So, Travis, what was your first comic?
My first comic book, I believe, was Amazing Spider-Man number 161. Now, I say believe because I'm not 100% sure. I got comics. My mother would buy them for me off a spinner rack at the grocery store. And for those of you who don't know what a spinner rack is, it's a rack that holds magazines that you could spin it around and they'd be stacked in a tower and you could turn around and look at different magazines, or in this case, comic books. I wasn't very much of a reader as a kid. I really hated reading. My mother discovered that was one of the few things that I would read would be comic books. So she'd buy me those as something to get me to read, and also as a reward for making it through the grocery shopping trip without being too much of a terror. I think those were my first ones. They're at least the first ones that I hung on to. I did get some other Spider-Man comics that I destroyed along the way as a kid. Issue 161, I believe, was in 1972, just to give you an idea of how old I am. So that would have been me at, well, I don't know, whatever. Maybe it wasn't 72, maybe it was 76. Can't remember for sure right now. But it had Spider-Man in it, it had Nightcrawler in it, and Wolverine and Colossus from the X-Men. Wolverine and Colossus are barely in it, and basic premise of the story was everybody thinks Spider-Man's a bad guy because during this era of Spider-Man's career, the newspapers always billed him as being the bad guy, and so he was. They were all the mutants, who of course were bad, considered bad guys themselves, were out to get Spider-Man basically. The next issue is actually kind of an interesting issue. The Punisher shows up at the very end of that Spider-Man, so that's how many different heroes were in that one comic book for me. The next issue I managed to get to. How I got 2 issues right in a row, I don't know, because this was before it was really easy to collect comics, at least not on a spinner rack in a grocery store. You just got whatever came out when it came out. It wasn't like you could, know, okay, it's been a month or whatever. Not that I would have had a clue at that point in my life, but it had Jigsaw in it. It was the first appearance of Jigsaw, which is a major villain for the Punisher. But anyway, now I think about it, I had to have been wrong on that date, because if that was the case, I'd only been like 3 or 4. So, and I know I wasn't getting comic books then, but by 6 years old, I know I was getting comic books that I was reading myself. Anyway, yeah, that was my first comic.